Hello and welcome everyone. Today we're going to look at X-Plane 11 and we're going to fly the default Cessna 172, the one that has the standard avionics, the GNS 530 and the GNS 430 system, not the upgraded one that has the GNS 1000. Not that that's not a great aircraft to fly, but because the avionics that are in that aircraft are so advanced, it probably isn't the best thing to learn on, especially as a private pilot, because the plane you'll train in probably won't be quite that advanced yet. Maybe it will, but the older technology is probably more appropriate to train on, in my opinion. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on a GPS flight plan, programming that into the aircraft avionics and using the autopilot to fly that plan. Sounds easy, but it can be a bit tricky, especially if you're used to aircraft that have a little bit more advanced avionics and autopilot capabilities. There's a number of things that can go wrong that I'll talk about. First, let me say I use Navigraph, and I can't recommend it highly enough. It's great. There are other services out there, probably a little bit cheaper, but Navigraph is what I use, and I can speak to it. I haven't used the others, can't speak to those, but if you fly frequently, if you fly in a network like FatSim, then it's almost a necessity. Actually, it probably is a necessity to subscribe to something. But that's a whole nother discussion. We're going to fly probably a 45-minute flight, I'm guessing, from Dover, Delaware up to Monmouth County in Jersey, near the Jersey Shore. And I went into Navigraph and I picked waypoints that are basically going to take us over and up the shore and then land at Monmouth Executive Airport. SimBrief is great. I usually use that for flight planning, but I'm not usually flying such a small aircraft and such small flight plans. It doesn't really add a lot of value if you're flying a 1 hour or less flight in a small area on an aircraft like the Cessna 172. So all I did was go into Navigraph and I picked 3 or 4 GPS waypoints. One of them is actually a VOR waypoint, but that's neither here nor there. We're gonna, actually I think it's both. Anyway, we're going to program it in as, oh yeah, it's a Winston waypoint and it's a SIE as a VOR. And we're going to do GPS, so I'm going to program it in as its GPS waypoint Winston. If we did this in SimBrief, obviously you'd be able to export that and load it in. That would simplify things for you a little bit. We need to get things powered up, so I'll go ahead and start the aircraft here. I think we're going to need fuel. We probably have 3 hours worth. 2 hours worth should be more than enough here. You don't need the fuel pump switch on in the fuel injected version, which the 172S is the fuel injected version. I think the checklist has you turn it on and then turn it off. I think that primes the fuel injection. Maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't. For practical purposes, it doesn't seem to matter. I'll leave it at that. And we want to look at things that are important, like our takeoff trim, and we want to slew our gyros. This compass, you notice, it doesn't line up with what the magnetic compass does. Yeah, in small aircraft with this kind of avionics, you have to set your gyros and slew them to magnetic compass. If you don't do that, probably all kinds of things are going to go wrong during your flight. And I had already programmed this the last time, so that'll save us a few steps. I've got speak. I haven't flown this, but I did program it and then restarted the sim because of a technical issue. Actually, it was user error, and that user would be me. Well, putting these in is really not difficult. We need to set the airport you're at should be the active leg. If you had just programmed this in, it would have the airport you're sitting at here, and you'd have to put the rest in, and the airport you're sitting at would have the magenta arrow, meaning it's active. So by me starting this and then restarting the sim, kind of threw things off. So if you were doing this, you'd put the first waypoint in, and you do that by highlighting over that. It would be a blank one like this, and as soon as you hit this smaller knob, it takes you into the mode where you can pick the waypoint name and put it in. That's all I've done. Now, a few things to be aware of is when you see this is highlighted, that means the outer knob is going to move to select these waypoints so you can manipulate them. If you use this smaller knob, what that's going to do is whatever line you're on, it's going to get you into the edit mode of that waypoint, which you don't want to do. Now, if you did have the flight plan composed in something external and you exported it and put it in the right directory, and you wanted to import it, you're going to push this, and notice none of these are highlighted. Now we're not in the flight plan edit mode. And now when you use this small, this brings up the list of all the flight plans that I have in that directory, and I could pick one. Just a little bit on the... No, we don't want to actually do that, so I'm just going to go. And how do you get back out to the map? Well, if you're in the flight plan mode, because you hit the FPL button, well, you hit the FPL button again. If you're in VNAV mode, well, then you hit VNAV again to get out of that. If you're in procedures mode, you hit the proc button to get out of that. If you happen to have had 3 of them active, well, you got to get out of a couple of them at least. That's just a little bit of basics how to navigate the system. You've got a few buttons here. These are the range. That scrolls out so you can see further. This scrolls in so you don't see as far, but you can see in a lot finer resolution. Usually when I take off, I want it to be about 3 nautical miles, which you can see right here. And then you have this button, which is your direct to button. You notice we have that same symbol here. It's got that direct to icon, and then it's pointing to KRJD. Direct to KRJD is what it is saying. Which is actually kind of wrong. So I'm going to go into flight plan mode, and notice none of these are highlighted. That's why I can't do anything here. I have to push. Now they're highlightable. I want to put that there, and I'm going to hit the direct to button while it's on speak, and then activate, and now it's direct to speak. That's what I expected to see. When you take off, your first waypoint is usually the first waypoint you set, not the airport itself. And the magenta line represents the leg that's active. Yeah, let's leave it at 5 nautical miles. And what else? We don't have any messages. The OBS feature here, ignore that for now. I might talk about it later. This button, CDI, also up here, you have one. They both do the same thing. We want this to be in GPS mode, and notice it is. Probably because I had it that way. The last time I shut down the simulator, it by default comes up in V-lock mode. That is not the mode you want if you're following a GPS waypoint plan. If you don't do that, the autopilot will seemingly go off in just whatever direction it feels like it wants. And I already talked about slewing the gyros to the compass. We did that. And I scoot over a little bit to get a straight view. That looks like that's about at the 20. Yeah. I'm a little bit wrong here. I need to go down a hair. If you don't have gyros synced and you don't have this in the right mode, see, they both do the same thing. See, watch. And you can do it down here too. Bottom line is you want it in GPS mode when you're following a GPS waypoint. And we need ATIS, don't we? Would be a good idea to get the altimeter.
Visibility 10. Sky conditions 15,000 scattered. Temperature 31. 2.19. Altimeter 2995.
Looks about right. Alright, an aviator's tablet is something I use, and I can't recommend it highly enough either, especially if you have a Navigraph subscription. It lets you pull up your Navigraph charts so that you have them from inside of X-Plane, so you don't have to keep alt-tabbing back and forth to something external like I do when I want to use their web-based chart. I don't think they gave us a wind direction, and we can see by the windsock down there the wind is basically blowing in the direction we're headed right now, and right now we're headed perpendicular to the runway that we're going to use. So whether we choose runway 12 or 30, there's a crosswind either way. So we'll choose the one that happens to point us closer to the direction we're going anyway. Ground operations in this aircraft can be challenging, especially if there's any wind, and especially on small airports like this. Sometimes you find that the terrain is not defined properly as asphalt or something that's appropriate for an aircraft to taxi on, and that can get you stuck and frustrated. The fact that these airports even exist says a lot about the product and its ecosystem. Somewhere over the years, this didn't already exist, somebody said, hey, I'm going to create this airport. See, now we're having a tough time making this turn. Did I accidentally taxi off the runway? No, I didn't. Not the runway, but the taxiway. we were not headed into the wind, so that shouldn't be the case, but whatever it was. Anyway, I was saying how all these, pretty much every airport that really is out there is in X-plane. And that's because of their Scenery Gateway program that they started years ago. If an airport wasn't already in the product, and someone wanted to build it, they provide as part of the product the world editor and other tools. It's all part of the extend it, part of their motto, right? Fly it, extend it. So people create the airports and submit it to the Scenery Gateway, and someone looks at it and says, yes, that looks right, and then it gets rolled up and made part of the product's base installation, which is nice. A huge ecosystem out there already. The flight simulator itself is important. What it can do, how it models flight, how realistic it is, and how fun it is to use. Those are all important things, but it's a lot bigger than the flight simulator program. You also have to think about the ecosystem, and with Microsoft Flight Simulator on the horizon, it's one of the things I need to understand better before I decide what Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 is going to mean to me. I've been flying flight simulators since probably 1983. Commodore 64 Flight Simulator 2 by Bruce Artwick organization, which got acquired, I think, and turned into Microsoft Flight Simulator. And throughout the late 80s, 90s, and into 2000s, they developed the product, continued developing the product, and the ecosystem grew huge. And then one day they said, well, we're done. So because I was there, a user of that huge ecosystem, and felt that, makes me a little less excited to embrace Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 and say, well, bye-bye to X-plane. No. Definitely got to wait and see what the product is really like. So I've taken off, and we're high enough that it's safe enough to engage Autopilot, but what I'm doing right now is just trimming the aircraft so that it flies straight and it's climbing. We're in the GPS mode, so as soon as I turn on the Autopilot, it's gonna turn left. I'm not gonna touch anything. We need to hit this nav button not once but twice. Watch what happens. Nav lights, but watch what happens when I press it again. This GPSS lights. That's the mode we want to be in because we're following a GPS waypoint. And now it's steering to intercept this line, and then it will fly along that line to that speak waypoint. Now right now it continues to climb because that's how I had it trimmed. Now I'm going to engage Autopilot to control the climb as well. We'll climb at 700 feet per minute. We'll probably back that down a little bit. We're going to go up to 3,500 feet, and that'll be our cruise altitude. We we see airspeed is dropping. The autopilot in this aircraft does not control your throttle. You do. So I'm giving it a little bit more power. We want to keep it at about, I think 74 is the ideal climb for this aircraft. If it continued to go down and I didn't have any more power to give, then I'd have to choose a less climb angle, which I'm going to do because it continues to drop. So I'm going to go down to 600 feet per minute and watch this change, and watch our airspeed will start to climb back up again. RPMs are, yeah, my throttles are full forward and we're not even getting 2,500. Now's a good time to start thinking about leaning out the mixture. Notice the EGT is very low, fuel flow is very high because we're in the full rich position. Now we've gained altitude, so the air density is different. We're running way too rich right now. Not only fuel efficiency is bad, but it is not the greatest thing in the world for your engine to run that rich either. I'm going to pull this out until the EGT maximizes. And look at fuel flows dropping. Our power and our RPMs aren't dropping. Up, and you see the EGC started as I'm continue to pull. I reach that point and the EGT starts to drop again, so I want to back it up and leave it about right there. We're at 2,500. I'll do that again when we get to the cruise altitude. This autopilot does not know what you want the cruise altitude to be. So you have to pay attention, and you have to take it out of climb mode when you get to the cruise altitude that you want. You may notice I have the yokes hidden. That's because in the beginning I want to operate these switches and whatnot, and it's in the way. For video purposes, I probably should have had it enabled because you can see where the aircraft controls are at. And right now they're straight ahead because we're right on that path and we're following that waypoint straight to this speak. Now what's going to happen when we get there? Well, the GPS system is going to realize as we get however close to this that it then considers us there, and it will automatically activate the next leg. And because autopilot is on in nav and GPS S mode and our CDI is in GPS, it's going to turn all by itself. I'm not doing that. We're almost at 3,500, so I'm going to hit altitude, and now it knows you want to cruise at 3,500. Aye aye, Captain, and it does it. And you see it just automatically activated the next leg because we're close enough to that speak waypoint that the GPS system considers us there, and now it activates the next leg. And you can see that if you bring up your flight plan to view it, as you reach each point, it rolls off the flight plan and the next one gets the magenta arrow, becomes the active leg. That all happens automatically. Now, what if I didn't have this in GPS mode? What would happen? Well, at this very moment, nothing happens. But more than often, if you're not in the right mode here, you're going to find the aircraft goes off in whatever direction. It's probably not doing anything right now because our nav radio is not tuned into anything and not receiving anything. Let's see if there's one nearby. We know there is because I said earlier that this Winston waypoint was also CIL VOR 114.80. let's go ahead and... Oh, that's calm. Okay, that gets us into, what did I say, 114.80. And we'll hit this button to push it to the active slot. Now we're tuned to that. And right now it's telling us we're 40 nautical miles from it, 40.4. And we're on a 276 radial to it. Which happens to be the aerial route that we had plotted. So we're confirming. But now if I put this in the wrong mode, we're going to probably see some stuff happen that we don't want to. Well, no, because it's also heading to the same physical point. Let me pick Atlantic City 117.115 ACY. .15. Should be close enough to pick that up, but it doesn't look like we are. Oh, and our aircraft isn't on this map, so let me hit the button there. There. .117.15. It's just not picking it up yet. We'll come back to that. And since we leveled off, I should have been monitoring engine RPMs and keeping this out of the red, which I did not, so I just abused our aircraft, our engine a little bit there. And if it had happened to overspeed, I'd have done even more bad. And I said earlier I want to look at trend, look at mixture again. Nope. It was right in the sweet spot that it needed to be. We probably don't need to touch that again until we land, because we're staying at the same altitude and pressure and air density will remain the same, and therefore we don't need to worry about it. Now AVTab, if there were departures for this, it would be great, because then we'd have the departure up and we'd see us on the moving map, but there really is nothing to see. But if you go into regular map mode, it'll give you kind of a street map view, so you can at least see where you are relative to the geography that you know. But this Navigraph web-based chart app is very handy. You can see we're moving right along the flight plan that we plotted. And I was probably wrong when I said this would be about a 45-minute flight, because it's going to be a little bit longer than that. Pick up airspeed just a hair. And speaking of that, yeah, our next Waypoint is 15 minutes away. We probably have about another 45 minutes from this point, so it's not going to be horribly bad in terms of the length of the video. Procedures, let's talk about that while we're waiting. The procedures button gets you into the menu where you can select approaches, arrivals, departures, and activate approaches if you have already one in. We don't have any. If I say select arrival, it knows that our arrival airport is KBLM because it got that from our flight plan. Let's see what arrivals are available. SIE. That's correct. If I go back into airports mode and put in KBLM and look at the charts, arrival, yeah, see aisle 4 is an arrival that goes to that. And let's look at that. Good way to understand your charts is to go to the web-based, select the destination airport, and hit this little button. And it'll show you all of the charts for that airport. Standard arrival. Show overview. Well, look at that. There is one, and you can get onto it from a couple points. So it's not a chart that can be overlaid, unfortunately. And I think we're already beyond SIE, aren't we? Let's get out of this. So we happen to be following that approach somewhat, in the sense that our flight plan does happen to use this segment in common. So the problem with selecting the arrival at this point is it's going to turn the aircraft around because we're already beyond where it really starts. So to prevent that, we need to put our heading on the actual I guess it's not going to let me out of there until I hit something here. If we're flying, yeah, this is our heading, and we want to put our heading bug right here, and then we want to go into heading mode so that it's now just simply flying that heading. And now when I select that arrival, it's going to say transitions. Where do you want to pick this up at? OTT or SWL? SWL is behind us, as is OTT, I believe. And hence why I didn't want to do this without having the aircraft on, or the autopilot on heading mode. I'll choose SWL. Say enter, and it gives you the opportunity to load it. That's fine. now it's got us going all over the place. Well, it's because it inserted a few points here. Like this one. See, we were already going to pans, and it's got us going there twice now. I should not have selected that. So we're just gonna remove all those points. So we're going Winston to Pans to Woodab to Ziggy. Yep, that's what we originally had, and I shouldn't have messed with it. And we can put ourselves back in nav GPSS mode. But I almost royally messed up our flight plan there. Operator error. But we recovered from it. But it would be hard if you're just learning how to do all of this and you make that kind of error. It seems very unfriendly. And one might think, well, they did a horrible job creating this flight simulator. Well, actually they didn't, because everything that it does and everything that the way these avionics and the systems work actually models the real thing. So well, I was going to say, they can't make it more friendly. Well, they could, but then it would lose its realism and its accuracy and its value for real world use. And most simmers that are flying an X-plane, they prefer realism over simplicity. They don't want realism sacrificed to make it simpler or to lower the learning curve, etc. And that's really where new people struggle to really embrace X-plane. Everything that you need. I mean, in real life, you wouldn't step in to a Cessna with these avionics without going to ground school, without studying how to fly and studying how the specific avionics work, radar and radio navigation, etc. But some people get the impression that that's how you shouldn't have to do those things in order to get good use out of a simulator. Well, the reality is, if you could just hop into X-plane and not have any learning curve, it would be more of an arcade game than a simulator. Anyway, I was saying, go to your X-plane installation, your X-plane directory in aircraft, laminar research for the default aircraft. The Cessna 172 is what we're flying right now. There's a number of PDFs in here. These are modified for use for flight simulation only, not for real world, but it tells you the GNS 530, this piece of equipment. It's the real documentation. Well, it's close to real. They took the real in real life some manufacturer makes this. It's Garmin. You'll notice it doesn't say Garmin. It says X-Plane. They probably couldn't afford or couldn't agree or strike a deal to use Garmin's name, but this is modeled after the Garmin 530, and if you look at the Garmin 530 documentation, it will look, they do use the Garmin name here, so they probably have licensed it. But my point is, this thing works in the simulator as it works in real life, and therefore, if you really want to know how to operate the thing effectively and not experience mistakes and horrendous flights because of your misunderstanding of how this piece of equipment operates, you probably want to familiarize yourself with the documentation, and here it is. It's all here. It even says, let's look at the index or table of contents. You've got programming a flight plan. Well, we kind of went through that. Where is flying a flight plan? Now I know it's here, I'm just missing it. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong documentation. The Autopilot unit, also this thing here, control box S-Tech thing, is modeled off of a real world thing that is commonly installed in these aircraft, and it'll tell you here's how you use it. GPS steering mode right here. It says push the nav button twice to select GPS steering mode. The aircraft will steer according to the flight plan that has been programmed into your GPS device. That's why we had to press this a couple times to get that lit, to get it to fly our GPS flight plan. And everything you want to know about how to use the Autopilot, it can do a lot more than what I'm going to talk about today. You're seeing me using it to automatically steer from waypoint to waypoint, and you saw me use it to climb, and now we're maintaining cruising altitude. It can do a little more. I'm not going to dive into everything it can do. And likewise, the documentation for this actual device up here, it will tell you what each and every button does and how you program it and how it works. But today's demonstration that I'm doing, I'm trying to just kind of give you the essentials and keep it simple and somewhat short. So we're approaching this, and we can look at our Navigraph moving map to see, yep, we're about to make that turn that goes right up the Jersey shore. And like I said earlier, we're not going to have to do anything. Oh, we got a message. Set CRS to 99. What does that mean? Well, that's the GPS telling you that it wants you to set this on your CDI, course deviation indicator. It wants you to set it to 99. We're going to pretend like we didn't see that message, and we're going to see what happens because we didn't do it. And for those that can't wait and the suspense is just killing you, I think we're going to see the aircraft, or the Autopilot is going to turn and proceed along the path anyway. Which begs the question, then why did they want us to do that? Let's see if I'm right first, and then I'll speak to that. here. 30 seconds, we're going to find out if I'm right or wrong. And because this approach isn't one that supports moving maps, we're not going to have it up there anymore. And look at that, it steered. It said, yep, we're here at this waypoint and it's time to set the next one as active. And it told us to set our course to 052. And I didn't do it. Why is it working? Even worse, let me set it to something completely wrong. It's not having any effect. It's a proper practice. 052, right? And you see when I get close to 052, that message goes away. It's a proper practice to have the OBS set on the radial that you're following. If we were to turn off autopilot, there we just did. Now we're flying this by hand, and the aircraft was basically trimmed correctly. It's starting to deviate a little bit. Let me retrim it so that it flies straight and level. With hands off the controls, and they are off the controls. Let's get off the course. So we're going to go off in this direction a little bit. And I didn't have to turn the autopilot off. I could have just went into heading mode and told it, set the heading bug. Let's do that. We'll do that, and we'll have it maintain altitude as well. But now we've told it, hey, we don't want to follow that GPS point anymore. We want to go off in this direction. Why would we do that? Well, circumstances do sometimes require you to deviate from your initial flight plan. Air traffic control instructions will always override your flight plan. So for whatever reason, air traffic control, or we saw, or in visual flight rules, we might see another aircraft, and we have a responsibility to remain 2,000 feet to the side, above or under that, and maintain that separation. We can't just plow along on our flight plan and go, well, we're flying a flight plan and we should have had the right of way. No, it doesn't work that way. Alright, now, using my CDI as it is right now, I'm thinking, did I have this set at 58? I probably did. Yeah, I did. So now we can see it here, and we can see clearly I'm gonna have to turn left to get back on course. But let's say this screen broke or whatever. You didn't have that. And you don't have the Alt-Tab ability to go over here and understand your situation and position. Now all you have is this. Well, we know the radial is this 58-degree point, and we can see it's to the left of us. So if we turn to 58 degrees, which I'm using the heading bug because the autopilot is in heading mode, and I've set it to approximately 58 degrees. Now that's not going to intercept that path. It's going to run parallel to it, and obviously we can see it over here. But if all we had to go by was this, we'd know we're not on an intercept path. We've got to steer about right there to get onto an intercept path. Well, the point is, if before you lost this, and whatever caused you to deviate off of your path that you are following, if you didn't have this set, how would you find it again? Because as I rotate this, it's not helping me. What would I do? There's nothing here that tells me where that path is. There's no way to find it, except if I had previously set it in case I lose all my stuff that I'm used to having, and I just have these two pieces of equipment, the CDI and the heading indicator. That's why you set that. You can fail to do that. You can ignore these messages. Oh, it's saying 52. There. Oh, and what does message airspace near and here? Near above? Well, we're about to cross over an airspace, which you should make contact air traffic control and be under air traffic control. But we're not doing that today, so we're just going to ignore it. That's the point of those messages. You can have this set completely wrong, and the autopilot will continue to follow point to point. And just to prove that, before we cross that radial, and you see our CDI is starting to move because we're almost on that radial again. Let me get us off of that radial. Alright, we'll fly at 100 for a little bit. And now with this set not at the proper place, and I'm going to go out of heading mode and I'm going to go back into nav GPSS mode, it's still going to intercept and get us back on that path. And I'll leave the OBS in the wrong place and we'll see what happens. I can predict what's going to happen is as we get close to that radial, this CDI needle is going to start to center. And a seasoned pilot who is familiar with VOR navigation and whatnot would look at this, and once the needle is centered, which is going to happen any minute now, can just start to see the needle starting to move now as we're getting close. Now, if the only piece of information anyone had looking at this piece of equipment, they'd say, you're flying the 320 radial to your nav aid, and you're centered on that 320, except we're not. We're not flying a 320 radial. We're flying, what was it, a 58-degree radial to that nav aid. So it's probably changed now. Oh, no. It probably is 52. That's why it's good practice to move this. And this, by the way, is not an HSI. Horizontal situation indicator. This is a different animal. This is a CDI, course deviation indicator. It shows your course and how you're deviated from it. It does not show you what heading you're flying right now at this point in time. You need this other instrument to know that piece of information. This is your heading indicator. This is your CDI. This is not an HSI, because if it was, it would also have the heading indicator functionality built into this. So no, it's not an HSI. Technically speaking. And I clarify that because a lot of people in simulation really want to be technically accurate. And I should probably say that from 1989 to 1999, no, it was 1988 to 1998, I was in the United States Air Force as an aircraft communications and navigation systems specialist, which meant I was a technician that kept the avionics systems working, specifically the navigations and communications. So I really do know what an HSI is and what a CDI is and the difference between the two. Alright, so now we're back on course. What else? I set the VOR to that Atlantic City VOR a long time ago, but we didn't have a signal. Now we do. We're 5.8 miles away from VOR ACY, and we're on radial 140. Now if I happen to have this not in the GPS mode, we'll probably see some goofy stuff happen. But we're really not. Well, that's odd, because anytime I can recall flying, if you don't have that in the right mode, it flies off in all kinds of weird directions. Well, we're not tuned into a localizer. I guess that might be the reason. Yeah, I think that's when that comes into play, when you're close enough and you've got an ILS tuned in. This being in the right mode becomes really important. Well, no, I've got 2 VORs here tuned in. Let's put this down here on the secondary. 117.15, right? And for a VOR, you can find where you're at relative to it by moving the OBS knob, because whenever you get to where that VOR needle centers and this flag points in that direction, telling us that this VOR radio is about 90 degrees from where we're at right now. If we look at a bigger map, yeah, it is. That's that VOR. Here's where we are, and now we're not quite 90 degrees, but see, the needle has moved. Now we're at, oh, we were at about 100 degrees. Now it's moving. But GPS points don't do that. You can't plug in a GPS point and then use the OBS needle to find the direction. And what would happen if we're flying along and for whatever reason the GPS features all break? Well, we'd fall back to VOR navigation. And if for some reason that didn't work, we might use this automatic direction finder thing, which honestly I've never used and I almost always turn it off. And dead reckoning, a compass, dead reckoning with charts and protractors and using this magnetic compass. There's value in learning how all the systems work, not just the GPS. GPS is fun, it's accurate, and it's probably most heavily used these days. But if you don't know how to fall back to traditional radio navigation, that, in my opinion, wouldn't be really complete virtual pilot training. And here we are now, we're about to get to this GPS waypoint called Pans. Then we're going up to this one called WUDAB, and that puts us online, or in line, for an approach, runway 32, RNAV approach. And this is what I was talking about earlier. It's nice, most of the charts are overlayable, which means you can overlay that chart right onto the map and see that chart in relation to your current flight plan and path. And from this we know when we get to this point, WUDAB, right then we turn 325 degrees, and that puts us in line for this landing. We also have this radar nav waypoint JOMIP, or JOMIP, I don't know how they pronounce that. And you've got on your approach chart the lateral navigations aspects of it, but you've also got your vertical, and you can see some of the verticals here too. They want us to be at 2000 by the time we get up near these waypoints, and they want us at 2000 when we get to WUDAB, and then they want us to descend in this manner from WUDAB to JOMIP, and then from JOMIP we're basically going to descend as we need to land. And I said earlier, we'll take this chart away for now. I said earlier that the aircraft, this autopilot does not control your throttle. So, and it does not have a VNAV autopilot profile like the bigger aircraft, where you do your flight plan and you plot your course, LNAV, and your VNAV profile, and then the aircraft autopilot follows it. We've got to control throttle, we've got to control altitude. Autopilot will help us control the altitude, but we can't tell it right now, hey, I want to be at 2,000 feet when I get to WUDAB, and it will just do it. Well, it kind of will. We've got this VNAV page. This doesn't tell it to do it. Oh, wrong button. This doesn't tell it to do it, but it is kind of a calculator to help you understand what you need to do. So we said we want to be at 2,000 feet MSL at WUDAB. 0 nautical miles before WUDAB is effectively at WUDAB. And this aircraft typically descends at about 800 feet per minute, I believe. So if I wanted to descend at 800 feet per minute, I need to start my descent in 10 minutes 42 seconds. If I don't want such a steep descent, and I just want to descend at 500 feet per minute, then I start my descent in 9 minutes 22 seconds. And what does this mean? This means right now. If I was to start my descent right now, what descent rate would I need to hit 2,000 at WUDAB? And the answer is negative 121 feet per minute. Now it's 122. I don't think you can set this and then minimize it, and I don't think it will pop up with any kind of notification. Hey, it's time to start your descent now. Would be nice if it did, but it doesn't. Oh, I'm going to put it back to 800 anyway. Let's go 700. 9 minutes and a half. And again, I reiterate, it's not that the X-Plane developers have chosen not to have it do that friendly feature. Maybe they have, and I just never noticed it. I am getting some points. Oh, it's popping up saying it's now time to track the next waypoint. And here's my pop-up telling me my new course to set over here. 38. But I don't think there's going to be one of those pop-ups that says, hey, you should start your descent now. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. But again, to finish that thought, if it's not here, it's not because the developers of X-Plane don't want to implement features to make it more friendly. They don't want to implement features that don't really exist in the real equipment that this is modeling. And most of the flight simmers that use X-Plane would say that they should continue that kind of a mindset and not oversimplify the simulation. That's really a big difference between X-Plane and Microsoft Flight Simulator, or FSX, which was Microsoft Flight Simulator. Then they sold it to another developer, but under the hood, at the end of the day, it's Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's technology of circa 2005. Still working today. It's actually kind of an amazing thing if you think about it, because at the time, hardware didn't exist to set the detail to max and have it render like it does today. I was going somewhere with that thought, but I forget where. Oh, I was gonna say, you know, Microsoft Flight Simulator, it has settings where you can set the realism. There are no settings to control the realism in X-Plane. The simulator strives to model the aircraft and its equipment in a realistic fashion. Although you can choose the options to start on the runway with the engines running, and starting that way, I'd say almost any idiot can figure out how to full throttle and then gain speed, take off, and climb. Landing the aircraft is a whole nother ball of wax. There may be an auto land feature. I think there is an AI flies my aircraft feature, which is kind of intended to help bridge the gap between those seeking the most simple experience versus those seeking the most realistic. In any event, if you're one that seeks simplicity over realism, then Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 is probably something you want to be extremely excited about. I'm excited about it, and I don't even prefer simplicity. But I have no doubt that they will continue the way they had always done it, which is to offer simplicity for those that want it and offer realism for those that want that. And the graphics and the advanced world rendering and whatnot. Yeah, I'm excited about it. Again, I'm very reserved. You won't see me uninstalling X-Plane the day that is released. But boy, the forums sure are full of people already trying to recruit people on the dump X-Plane bandwagon. Alright, I get it. It doesn't run well on your system. You don't like it. You probably want it to be more of a video game than a simulator. That's fine. It's okay if you don't like it. Why does it have to be, in your view, that everyone else can't like it? Anyhow. And I doubt there are very many people that are on that bandwagon that were even alive back when Microsoft divested from their player base and the ecosystem around that product and said, we're taking our ball and going home. So you've got $10,000 worth of equipment and software tied to this product. Sorry about that. Alright, we're getting close to our destination. It's time to start thinking about our approach. We said runway 32. And I just harped on and on about realism. We should probably check recorded ATIS and see if they want us on any specific runway. 121,625. Oh, it happens to already be there. Look at that.
On the executive memo. Infom. Visibility more than 10. Sky clear. Temperature 29. Dew point 14. Altimeter 2991.
Sounds like we're free to choose, and we'll choose the radar nav, runway 32. There's no ILS approach to this runway. Now, if you're familiar with the ILS approaches, and you're not so familiar with modern GPS approaches, you might wonder what's the difference. Well, from a practicality standpoint, there's not a whole lot of difference. We're going to get, our CDI is going to show us our position relative to the runway left and right, as well as the vertical descent path that's appropriate. And the glide slope line is going to work and help us stay on the appropriate descent. I guess what I'm saying is it's going to work exactly like you would expect it to work if we were locked onto an ILS approach, except it's not an ILS radio signal that we're using. It's a RNAV approach that's pre-mapped out with altitudes and waypoints to align you on the runway, and it, from your perspective, will function about the same. But technically, an RNAV approach is not a precision instrument landing technology. Meaning, if we had zeroed visibility all the way down to minimums, we really should be using an ILS approach, not an RNAV approach. If this runway doesn't have ILS, so what would we do? Well, we'd be diverting to LaGuardia is what we would be doing. Now we see our aircraft on this little aviator tablet window. We're getting close to WUDAB. Interesting though, our GPS looks like it's going to go to WUDAB and then do this thing and go to Ziggy. We don't really want to do that. Oop. Oh, okay, they don't go away, they just scroll up. Let's get rid of that Ziggy. There. We said we wanted to be at 2,000 feet when we got to WUDAB, and we didn't do it, so let's do it now. Take a bit of a steeper descent than we normally would. Yeah, we'd have to descend at 1,800, 1,900 feet per minute to get to 2,000 at WUDAB, so we're not going to do that. We'll be a little bit over. Message telling us to set course to 325. Oh, 325. Duh. So we should have been at 2000 by WUDAB, then we'd go down to 1600. We're going to go down to 1600. Just curious to know what happens if I put that in the wrong mode. I can't get that to behave badly no matter what I do. Oh, and you can see me making slight adjustments to our gyros versus our magnetic. I did that because I saw that we're not quite on the line. What did I say? 1600, and we're there. Overshot it a little. Did I even put in an approach? I don't think I did. Nothing to see here, just a stall. Well, I just dumped the whole flight plan. So we're gonna abort that. Get on autopilot. And try again. And we'll select that approach. WAV no is what we should, because we're flying basically to it now. Alright, and we'll activate it so that it's active. Alright, and we'll go back into GPSS mode. Alright, now it's gonna fly the approach. And we should be at should be at 2000 at WAVNO. So a bit of a pilot error. Dumped the whole flight plan while I was trying to get lined up on approach. I'd be willing to guess that that probably actually does happen in the real world. Usually the pilot is actually focused on operating the equipment and the aircraft appropriately and not running his mouth about Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. We came down in altitude a little bit, so it would be appropriate to check our mixture again. No, it's in a good spot. I should have noticed this earlier because it didn't have the actual approach. Now it does. Alright. We're heading up to Wavno, and now it's time. It's telling us to set our course to 36. To what? And we need to go down. Down to 1700, right? No, we don't go down here. Descend after Woo Dab. Now we're turning and we're gonna have to descend. To 1700, and you see that the glide slope as well as the localizer indicators on the CDI are now. That's the first thing I noticed earlier that should have clued me in that I didn't have the actual approach selected and programmed in. Now if it says I'm below the glide slope, why am I descending? Oh, because the approach says 1600 is where you intercept. So we're going to do that. That Chomip is our descent point where we should intersect and see this glide slope needle start to center. In the meantime, I want to start getting into landing configuration. Reduce airspeed and get approach flaps out. I land with full flaps in this aircraft. Alright, at this point I'm actually going to take control. We should be at full rich for landing. Don't want our engine to stall out because of leanness. On approach, I'll take control. Stay at 1600. I'm gonna line up the localizer needle. In the meantime, intercept the localizer a little bit steeper. We're going so slow. Wind is probably making us stand still. Now we're starting to center. And you see the glide slope needle is starting to center as we remain at 1600 and cross JONIP. Again, it's not any different than what you would think if you were following an ILS radio approach. Except it's not. And there, we're on the glide slope. We've got greens on the runway. Now we're gonna start the descent. little bit of a crosswind. See that even if visibility had been quite poor, following this RNAV approach, I mean, it does seem to give this precision to me, but it's not technically considered precision for the worst conditions. And this runway is on bumps. And I think that's probably where we'll call it a day. I'll just park this aircraft. At least get off the active. I think that'll be a wrap. We went through the flight planning, programming the GNS 530, and using Autopilot to follow this flight plan. We controlled altitude for the most part using the Autopilot. We made a mistake by not selecting our approach procedure early enough, and I made a mistake and dumped the entire flight plan, and we had to abort and come around again. I'm not going to edit that out, because I think as people try to learn flying this aircraft and these avionics, they'll probably have the same thing happen. And I try to leave the aircraft where it's configured right for the next person. We'll dump the flight plan. And with that, we will call it a day. Well, thank you for watching, and I hope what I've done here is of value and helps someone somewhere. Thank you, and good day.